Hey everyone, Dr. Ecker here for a fun lecture on doing online research. And yes, there was a time, believe it or not, long ago in the before times when we did research from actual books like the ones you see behind me. And we sat in actual libraries and we looked over actual pages to find actual information. Um, that world has changed. Even before everything made us do online education, at least for the foreseeable future, realistically, most of the research process, especially at the undergrad level, is done online, and more libraries are making those resources available. And ultimately, I think that's a good thing. It helps to make our research more portable, and it certainly gives us access in a lot of ways we didn't have before. For example, even when I was finishing my dissertation at Ohio State, I lived sort of near campus, but it would still mean for me 15 or 20-minute drive, trying to find some place where I can actually park the car, paying for parking, walking to the library, finding the book on the shelf, reading it, and figuring out what I was going to do with that information. It was a lot easier and a lot more convenient to have everything in PDF. And so I have put together some resources for today's lecture just on getting your head around the research process. I talked through our specific requirements for major paper 2 during class the other day. So I'm going to start there and kind of talk through the overall research process about things like the forming research questions and, most importantly, at this stage, finding a topic. In the second half of this lecture, I'm going to look more at the actual mechanics. So we'll talk about things like finding the right search keywords, showing you how the databases work, organizing your materials, certainly talk about some ways to evaluate those sources as well. And I will finish up that second hour by looking at the resources we have available here at Cal State, because there's a lot out there. We are in the age of Google, and so finding information, it's not hard. We don't even have to actually type it in. We can ask Siri or Alexa or Google Assistant, although Google probably already knows it before we say it. And so we might have a series of queries like, oh, hey Siri, when does Great Clips open back up? Hey Siri, where can I buy haircutting equipment? Hey Siri, how long does it take hair to grow back? You get the idea. So I want to show you some resources. I've also put a handout for you up on Blackboard under the week 6 lecture notes, so you can get a sense of where these databases are and some tips for doing that. So I'm going to switch over to our lecture notes and we'll get started. There we go. All right. I did not design this particular graphic, but I like the way it gives an overview of the research process. There are a lot of different steps to keep in mind here. And even though we are mainly working in terms of finding sources with databases and websites, it still helps to think of kind of all these things going on at once. In fact, the only way I would adjust this is to point out that these processes up here, from choosing a topic even all the way to gather information, they often kind of circle back on each other. The research process is very rarely linear and simple, at least academically. And so you might find better keywords as you do more reading. I'll talk more about that later in this lecture. You're certainly going to be adjusting your thesis and your ideas, and sometimes even your entire topic, as you do more research and find out what's out there. I do wholeheartedly, though, endorse this idea up here. Research something that interests you. Now, for paper 2, I'll talk more about topic selection a little bit later. For paper 2, you want to pick something that will make some positive difference in your academic or your professional career, or possibly both. So I'm encouraging you to find a topic that connects to what you want to do, either maybe in your courses to come or in the job you have after college, because you do have to get a job after college. And so I want this to be a very practical research project, but it's also a way to kind of get you more acquainted with a field that's going to be significant in your life in some way. So let me start by talking about research projects kind of as a species, as it were. And not, of course, not all of these facets are going to apply to every single project. But compared to the other work, stuff that you've been doing earlier this quarter, you're going to do several new things in a full-scale research paper. First, you're going to have to show a much broader set of knowledge about your topic. And partly this is because you have a lot more pages to fill, right? The final draft of paper 2 is 8 to 10 pages. And so you need to show that there's enough to say and that you have a good enough grasp, you've developed that expertise about that particular topic. And this is why I think a lot of people, myself included, tend to start a research project with big, ambitious, broad ideas. Because you think about, I have to write how many words? And you think there's no way I could possibly do that unless I talk about everything. So you do need to strike that balance. You want to show that there is a broad base of knowledge, but you do actually end up with a fairly specific set of expertise that you're going to communicate there. Part of doing that is going to be engaging with other scholars. Now, depending on the topic you want to research, there may be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scholarly articles just on that particular relationship or theme or event or whatever you're looking at. Or there may be 2, or there may be 0 in some cases. However you approach that, and I'll speak more to that a little bit later, you need to find some way to talk back to those people. So it's not just the kind of more traditional high school and early college level of, here's a quote, I'm going to put a random citation here because I found a website or something that agrees with me, and then I'm done. It's a deeper level of engagement, both in terms of how you summarize the material, which I'll lecture on next time, as well as how you synthesize that, kind of show what's important about it. And so you're going to be presenting this argument in the context of those larger conversations. This is the basic they say, I say model we've been looking at all quarter, that it's not just a matter of saying, I've done this research and I can produce all these different sources. I always marvel, though not in a good way, at those high school research assignments that have you find 25 different sources on your topic, because all that really teaches you is how to find 25 different sources. By the time you bring all of those in, you don't have any room to make an actual argument. And so you spend the whole time just trying to cram in all these different citations and your voice gets lost. And I think that's kind of tragic, and it doesn't really help you learn how to make an argument. It teaches you how to make other people's arguments, which is not our point in this course. So as you're doing that, you want to show that the big questions are important here. And I've tried to highlight these in our discussions as well. So we were just talking about the Stanley Milgram experiment in these past couple of classes. And in part, some of the passages we looked at and some of the specific questions they brought up were unique to that text or that experiment. So, what's the best way to measure this concept of destructive obedience? Or is it fair to say that this is a particular ethical violation of these particular people's dignity, as Bauman puts it? But they also bring up much larger questions, and good scholarship, I think, should do that. It should point us toward the things that we can't settle in 5 or 10 or even 50 pages. The things that are maybe behind the scenes a little bit. How do we understand ethics? What does it mean to do a scientific experiment? How do you measure obedience? The sense you get from a well-written scholarly article, and the sense that I hope you produce in your own work, is that you have something interesting to say, but that's not all there is to say about this topic. It's always pointing towards and allowing and even encouraging further conversation on how this works. So that's a lot to live up to for any given research project. And I know a lot of you right now are still thinking about what sort of topics you can possibly choose for this paper. I did talk a little bit about this when I introduced the assignment. And of course, you have a couple of sample papers up on Blackboard, but I want to give you some more concrete advice as you move towards to start drafting your research proposals and figure out how that's going to look. As I mentioned in the assignment instructions, for this paper, your topic should reflect your academic and or professional interests. And that's for two reasons. One, you need to have a fairly academic topic so you can find academic sources on it, which makes sense. There are a number of interesting parts of our universe that just don't attract academic articles for some strange reason, mostly because journals don't really care that much about them or scholars haven't really touched it that much. And the other reason, more practical. For this assignment, one of your goals is to explain how this process is going to help you. So in your intro and your proposal in a different way, you're going to show why are you interested in this. And then as you conclude your paper, way in June, then you will need to say, what have I learned from this and how is this going to help? So start there. And this is a really helpful process if you are thinking about a further career in academia, or if you're going for a research position, being able to articulate, here are the specific things I'm interested in, is going to help you a lot in writing, say, a cover letter or even finding a job. Because if you, say you're applying to a chemical firm, let's pick one, let's pick Dow. They're a big chemical firm. And you get to your interview and they say, so what are you interested in? So you have a degree in chemistry from Cal State. And you say, well, I really like chemistry. Then you're probably not going to get very far in that interview. And so this is a good time to figure out what those interests are and be able to speak intelligently about at least one of them. So how do you do that? Well, a good source of brainstorming is your major classes. Some of you are getting close to graduating, so you've already taken some of those courses. Some of you are just kind of transitioning into that part, finishing up your gen eds, maybe even with this course. So go back to those topics. Maybe it's a class you took last quarter or even this quarter. Particularly if you could see yourself doing something like this later, because that's going to make you more motivated because it's going to be more practical for you. So go back to the course syllabus or the online description in the catalog. If you haven't taken the course yet, email the professor. Say, I want to work on a topic that's going to help me for your course. Can you recommend something, or can you send me a copy of the syllabus or the readings or something like that? This is particularly helpful if you have anything that's like a practicum course, any sort of independent study, if you're going to do a senior thesis. I know there are like summer research projects. This is a great time to work on those topics because you can get a jump start on the reading you'll have to do anyway. And you will impress the heck out of your supervisor and your professors because you've already come in doing this work. So feel free to duplicate those topics. If you're not sure if something will work, send me an email. I'll be glad to talk about it with you. You can also think more practically about a job that you want. It's not always clear how your college major or the specific classes you took are going to connect to the work you do. For example, in my own career, as an English major, nearly all of the courses that I took in my major were either in literature or literary theory. What I've done for the majority of my actual teaching career over the past 15 years is teach writing. Nobody taught me how to teach writing until I got to grad school. And so I was able to apply, my own writing skills and what I remembered from my professors, but it wasn't that formal level of training. And so don't stress out if something doesn't nicely fit with the major you have right now. Some of the best papers I read last quarter for this assignment applied something that's going to work more at the career level than the college level, and that's perfectly fine for this paper. So here it might help actually to look at job ads. What kind of skills do they expect or ask for? What kind of background knowledge? What sort of things they say, ideal candidates will be proficient in, or will understand, or will be able to do whatever in this area. This could be the first step to say, all right, how do I get myself ready for a job like that? What would it take for me to be able to say, oh yeah, I can totally handle this task, or I've done this project that will apply to your needs right there. So it's kind of a custom-made cover letter piece. As you're thinking ahead, how could you talk about this on a job interview? It's a good way to brainstorm as well. If you have gone through those and you're still kind of stuck, go to the databases. I'm going to show you how to use those in the second hour. In particular, find just, put in your target career and keep it simple. If you want to be a forensic scientist, put in forensic science. If you want to be a dietitian, put in dietetics or registered dietitian or something like that. Into the journal list, I'm going to show you where that is a little bit later, as well as to something like the EBSCOhost databases. That always gives you a starting point to see what do people actually talk about in this field. What are some of the big ticket items? What are some of the controversies? What is an ongoing investigation? Because remember, this needs to be recent scholarship. Heck, start at the Wikipedia page if you need to. Wikipedia has good information, generally. And that might point you towards something that would be more appropriate directly for this assignment. Since you need to find journal articles, I also recommend just going to Google and put, whatever your specialty or your potential topic is, and then the phrase academic journal. Journal's just a magazine. You will likely find stuff that relates to your field where people have actually published. And then you can go ahead and click through and see what have people published in here. So if you're interested in math education, there are dozens, probably, math education journals. You can look at where are the topics, what do people write about, and that might give you a hint as to where that would go. I have a list of sample research topics for you. As with this paper, all of these topics developed out of the individual author's interests and expertise, and sometimes their jobs. So, excuse me. So if you really want to write about fossilized grass evidence from the Cenozoic era, go for it. But unless you also happen to be a geology major with a very similar set of interests as the student who wrote that, you're probably not going to find it terribly useful. But I include these to show you the range of topics that could work for something like this. This first one, I think the sample paper might actually be on Blackboard. This was a student who was in the middle of changing her major, but she was working in childcare and had kind of learned about this thing called manding at work. And so she wanted to learn more about that. So for her, it was very practical. She was able to say, I've done this research, I understand the techniques better, I understand why it's used, and now I can impress my supervisor. Anytime you can end an academic paper with now I can impress my boss, that's a good thing. Some of these others, notice how it's not just, here's my general major, but it's applying a specific kind of knowledge to a specific context. So in the case of this one, benefits of physical activity for children with ASD, it's autism spectrum disorder. I believe this was a kinesiology major, but who was interested in working with children and specifically thinking about that subset. So kind of in the special education, children with special needs group, but also bringing in what she knew about kinesiology. And it worked out to be a really nice paper because she was able to combine those interests. Similarly with this one, this was a chemistry major who wanted to teach. And so if you're thinking about a teaching career, run, no, we need teachers. Yes, be a good teacher. You can think about how might I specifically improve how I reach these students? How might I use this particular approach? In this case, it was how could games help students learn chemistry? So think creatively about not just what you're learning, but how you could potentially apply that in a real job. All right, so feel free to email me if you have questions about specific topics, and we can talk through what might work in your situation. I'm going to change gears to talk then about elements of the research process, and I want to start with the idea of making a research plan. As you know, I'm big on project management in a course like this. There's lots of little assignments to keep track of, lots of deadlines. And part of the reason I do that is because if you develop those skills, if you can say, I can keep on top of this calendar, I can figure out how this process is going to work, you're going to be in a really good position for any other academic project we can throw at you. So in that spirit, I want to suggest several questions to ask as you are planning how to do your research and kind of what you're going to do with each of the pieces you find. First, you want to ask, what exactly am I trying to do right now? Because there are different goals for different parts of the project. If you don't have a topic yet, your goal is hopefully, how on earth do I find a topic for this paper? And that might spark other goals like, well, where should I go to look? Who do I talk to? What kind of things would be acceptable? How do I connect my interests to some sources I could use for this? As you find those topics, as you develop that paper, you're going to have different goals. And they might be as specific as, I need to find that citation for this particular article that I want to use. Or I need to figure out what that word means in that thesis statement, because I think that's going to be important. Even if this changes, you're going to still start by figuring out, what am I trying to do right now? Based on that goal, you need to figure out what kind of information you need. So at this point, for this project, for this task, what do you need to know about the topic? Where is that gap? Because research starts from a position of ignorance. Not stupidity, hopefully, but you research something because you don't know. If you knew it off the top of your head, then you wouldn't really need to research it. Once you figure out what info you need, and again, this is an iterative process, you might go back and forth here a couple times, then you want to figure out, where am I going to find this? And start with the most likely sources rather than trying to figure out where exactly is this going to be. And because part of this is going to be a matter of experience. As you decide what kind of material do you find in each of these sources, what kind of stuff does this database hold? What kind of articles does this journal publish? What kind of work does this scholar do? Then you can narrow down your searches. It's like when you have just moved to a new place. You have boxes everywhere, boxes and boxes and boxes, and hopefully they're labeled boxes. Because if you just packed everything into random boxes, then you might not know where on earth the can opener is until you go through and you find everything that might look like a can opener box, and you have unpacked 30 things before you figure out where the can opener actually is. So research is going to work in a very similar fashion. You learn more about your sources, and you're going to learn more about how to use them well. They are tools like everything else. And then the tricky part. I'm going to talk about this more in the second half of the lecture. Where do I find that? Now, the good news is we have lots and lots and lots of sources. Part of your student fees goes toward maintaining our library collections, towards buying subscriptions to journals and to databases, towards paying librarians, to find those sources, to fill faculty requests for, hey, I really want to have this book available to my students. And so part of it is going to be, how do you use those tools to find the sources? And I'll come back to that later. Don't neglect, though, the value of bibliographies. All those reference lists at the end of the article, all the stuff that they cite, because you're going to tend to cite stuff that's similar, of course, to your own research, to the topics you're interested in. And so you want to figure out how do I get from this source that's maybe really helpful to other sources they cite that could be helpful? Or maybe it might work a little bit differently. Maybe you find something that's close but not quite there, but maybe they cite something that's really useful for your work. I found a lot of sources that way, especially kind of the stuff that's a little bit out of the way, maybe the smaller presses or the scholars that aren't as well known yet. I'm going to talk about search keywords also in the second half, but it is good practice to kind of get to know that vocabulary. And you probably know more of this than you think, especially once you remind yourself in things like class notes and syllabi and other articles. Figure out what kind of keywords specifically connect here and what that is actually going to look like in your searches. And this can be a really frustrating process, trying to figure out what the actual word is for the thing you're talking about, because Google is not quite the Star Trek computer, but it's getting close. And so this is where trying different combinations and figuring out different strategies is going to help you. And I will share some of those tips later on as well. And of course, at some point, you need to write actual words. Well, it's a writing class, what can I say? Some days you will put in 2 or 3 hours into finding that one source, reading through it, getting some notes, figuring out what it is you're actually trying to say. And at the end of all of that, when you sit down to write, you'll be able to put together 1 sentence or 2 sentences. And there'll be 2 good sentences, 2 very well-informed sentences. Maybe they'll be in a footnote. Maybe they'll be part of your main argument. Maybe they'll just clarify that one little fact that you've been trying to track down. And then you look at your document at the end of the day and you've gone from 1,400 words to 1,450 words. And you think, those are hard days. Been there, done that. There are also days, though, where you can put in the 2 hours and suddenly you got enough material for 2 or 3 or 4 pages. But they usually come after the 2 sentence days. One thing you will run into a lot is this concept of a research question. Now, for paper 2 in particular, we're not doing a traditional research project in the sense that you ask a specific question and you kind of investigate it with the 10 to 15 sources or whatever. Well, I wouldn't give you 15 sources. But that you find some way to put your argument in conversation with others. But you will find that there are specific research questions for each of the sources that you read, especially the ones that are doing an experimental study. And so you want to kind of understand how they work. So I'm going to give you a little primer here on writing those and show you some samples of what that might look like you can use in future papers as well. So I draw here from the George Mason University Writing Center. They recommend that any research question should first of all be clear. It needs to be specific enough that you don't have to go on for 3 or 4 more sentences saying, so what I mean here is this. If an educated audience, especially an audience that knows something about your overall topic, has trouble following your research question, then they're going to have a lot more trouble following your study in the first place. Likewise, the research question should be focused. And this is one of the balances, the kind of the trade-offs I was talking about earlier. You need to have a narrow enough topic that you can cover well in the time and the space that you have. But of course, you need to have a big enough topic that you can actually keep writing for that many words. And this will take some time, so it'll take some practice. You're already finding, for example, that the 500 words in the response papers, maybe they go by a little bit quicker than you thought. That's actually a good thing. I think as you get used to writing those shorter papers well, it's a lot easier to dig in and kind of expand and enrich your papers for longer projects. Research question, they note, should also be concise. They define this as expressing it in the fewest possible words. I would actually tweak that a little bit. It is expressed effectively in the fewest possible words. because you can express something in a few words that doesn't actually clarify what you're actually talking about, and that's not going to help your readers any. So if you want to investigate the particular cell behavior of this organism under these particular ultraviolet light conditions, you need to say that rather than just saying, cell move funny. That's probably not going to get accepted to nature. And then this should be complex. And this is probably the hardest part of writing a good research question, and it kind of dovetails with the difficulty of writing a good thesis statement. Ideally, research questions should require more work. The same way that a thesis statement opens up your data for further analysis or further explanation, your research question should point to more work that you need to do. So this requires synthesis and analysis. This is exactly what you're doing with the sources you're reviewing. And I'll talk more about that in a future lecture before you could actually start answering this. So definitely stay away from yes or no questions, asking how does this work? Why? What's the mechanism here? Those are good approaches, and I'll show you that in a minute as well. And of course, this does need to be arguable. We're all about the arguments in this course. So there could be potential answers here. There should be multiple potential answers because there should be the potential for counter argument. Think about the debate that could result from the work you want to do. As I've mentioned before, whenever possible, work on issues, questions that you are really curious or passionate about. I know you don't always have that luxury in an academic classroom, but I found the best writers find some way to bring that in. When I teach English 107, which is the Composition 1 class, I require my students for their final research papers to write about something that makes a difference in their everyday lives. And they write so much better once they have that permission, once they have that freedom to say, hey, this is something that maybe nobody else in the world really cares that much about, but it makes a big difference to me. And so it's instead of reading 15 papers on we should abolish the penny while we pay college athletes and legalize marijuana during gay marriages. So tired of all those papers. I get to read about, this is a question I've been wondering about. This is a problem I've been having. I had a student last quarter write about what are the academic effects of commuting to college, because she lived in, in Beaumont and was driving 45 minutes to an hour every single day to San Bernardino to school. And she's like, is this helping me or hurting me? I've had students write about some of the medical issues they have been facing or the family members have been facing. I've had students investigate specific aspects of maybe bigger social issues that actually make a difference to them. And their writing improves so much. And that works here as well. That's one reason why I designed this assignment this way. So you're working on something that's not just academic or what your professor thinks is appropriate, but it's something that you can benefit from. Because I would probably never voluntarily read some of the papers that I read for this assignment last quarter, but I could tell the authors were interested and they were invested, and that improved the writing quite a bit. So let me show you some sample research questions. These are from a different English class, so they're going to look different from stuff you're going to encounter in your research, but the structure is important. This question was from a film analysis, and the theme of the course for this set was belief, and so you'll notice that thread coming in here. In this case, a movie called A Dog's Journey, really kind of hokey sort of cheesy family movie. But she looked at how this relationship between these two characters, CJ and Bailey, critique popular understandings of reincarnation and present a more comfortable version of death and rebirth. So we have an observation. We have how do they do this? And what does it do to accomplish this particular goal? So obviously the author thinks this is what's happening, and she wants to look at how does this work in this particular film. Simpler form, same concept here. how does this movie express these cultural beliefs about this holiday? I had a lot of students write about cultural beliefs in Coco. They loved Coco. This paper was on The Simpsons. Anytime you can write about The Simpsons, it's a plus, right? So same format though. How does this episode, do this, critique sexism and patriarchy by doing this? And what I like about this particular research question, I made for a good paper, was that it doesn't stop by saying, hey, this episode critiques sexism and patriarchy, because, well, basically every Lisa episode critiques sexism and patriarchy in some way. But it does so by saying, well, how do things like belief and free will and control interact here? How is this going to help us understand and kind of anchor our analysis of this episode? It's a really interesting episode. A similar set here, this is about characters again, so like the first one. So how do these characters in Gilmore Girls, yes, they wrote about Gilmore Girls, portray themselves as feminists, as the scare quotes are the students here, and push the boundaries of equality? So you can see some of the patterns here. This is a fun paper. How did Rick Grimes' movie about killing develop throughout The Walking Dead? Darn, you have to go back and watch many episodes of The Walking Dead to do your homework. What a tragic happenstance. So even though your research questions will look very different depending on the field that you're writing about, they're still going to follow some of the structural patterns. They're still going to ask, what is going on here? How does this thing work? What accounts for this? What are some of the differences here? What's going to predict this outcome versus that outcome? And that's where the fun of doing science and doing really any sort of research comes in, to figure out where do the details work out and why. I want to give you a model then. It's called the BEAM model by a rhetoric scholar named Joseph Bishop, that might help you get a handle on the kinds of sources you're going to encounter, because not every source is going to do the same work for you. And it helps to think about the different ways that those could contribute to your argument. So he puts this in terms of 4 common sources. The B is for background. Background sources show up a lot in history. They establish factual information. They establish some background or context. And so you might want to look at what is actually being done at this time and place. So in the article, we didn't actually read this one, but in the article in our textbook called Torture at Yale, this was about the experiment that Milgram did, but it starts off by giving a lot of historical background. Talks about Milgram's reputation. It talks about coverage of his famous experiment, because this kind of made his career up through he passed away in the mid-'80s. And that context gives the author, Ian Nicholson, some room to set up. So part of what he did to research this particular article, I think this was a book chapter actually, was to look into all of the files and all of the kind of accounts of Milgram's reputation and history. So it'd be a background source for him. Then you have exhibit or evidence sources. Bishop says these are materials a writer offers for explication, analysis, or interpretation. So this is the data. Sorry, ignore that bit about the ad. This is from an old PowerPoint. But these would be the things that you are analyzing yourself. So if you're writing a paper for English class about a poem, your primary source is your poem. If you're analyzing a chemistry experiment, your primary source is the chemical data. You're going to write a lot about these sources, obviously. In fact, you hear primary and secondary sources a lot used in those terms. But you can also bring in evidence sources that show how you're going to support general claims that you make. So you don't have to support every single, the general knowledge claim. I talked about that several classes ago, but it does help to back up specific ideas if they're relevant to your main argument. The A sources are the most helpful for a project like Paper 2. These are argument sources. Begin quoting Bizzop, materials whose claims the writer affirms, disputes, refines, or extends in some way. So you may hear the term analytical secondary sources. This is because they analyze things. Surprise, surprise. They are the journal articles that you read that say, so here's what really happens in Moby Dick. Or this is the critical review of a play. This is the account of this particular cell's behavior. This is the prediction of what does this particle tell us in terms of how it reacts in this particular physical environment. These are going to be really helpful for you, especially if you're doing a project where you are also analyzing your own data. That's not the case in paper 2 specifically, but it is a good way to get into a topic to understand that better, is seeing what kind of analysis have other people done on this. And then lastly, there are method sources. These are more about theories and frameworks. So if you have completed most or all of your gen ed classes, you've run into method sources in particular fields. It's hard to study economics without running into the theories of Karl Marx, even though they're nonsense. There are a lot of people who follow those, who apply those theories. In my own field in English, we have dozens of all these isms and critical theories that we're expected to know and apply in different ways. And in most cases, they don't even mention the specific data or specific text that maybe you're using them for. I've got a book, for example, I got it as one of my college textbooks called the Portable Nietzsche, or the Complete Works of Nietzsche, the Basic Writings of Nietzsche. There it is, right on the shelf. And he does occasionally analyze specific things. He's kind of obsessed with the music of Richard Wagner, but it's mostly used because he's a philosopher. And so if I were to do a Nietzschean reading of a particular novel, then I would pull in some claim Nietzsche makes about thought or knowledge or the world and say, this is how I'm going to use this here. You're likely to read mostly argument sources for this particular paper, but it does help to keep all 4 of these types in mind as you're planning future research projects. Here are some very useful library links. I just want to put these all together so you have them. I particularly recommend the Choosing Using Keywords video. It's a lot of fun, and it gives you a good sense of how different kinds of sources interact, especially in settings like this paper where you are expected to use one particular kind of source. So you're looking at academic sources for paper 2, but there may be other settings where non-academic sources or popular sources are certainly appropriate. May even be the best option there. Some of these you've probably run into already doing the reading for today's class, as well as the preparing for the research exercise. But they're helpful to have. I especially like the citation survival kits. Find the one in the style that you use and bookmark it. It will save your butt, especially if you don't have the 1,400-page Chicago Manual of Style, which is on that bookshelf back there. And I'll show you some of these also as well in the second half. Databases by subject is very helpful if you are looking at stuff in a particular discipline or major. And I'll show you how to use those coming up. All right, so that will be the end of our first half. In the second half, I'll come back and look more at how to use these databases, how to do things like find and organize your sources, how to use search keywords effectively, and I'll close by showing you how that actually works with the stuff we have at Cal State. See you then.